For a few years, I tried my hand at scrapping in my area for a living, and surprisingly, I did pretty well for myself. Scrap metal was abundant in my town, and people would even offer to pay me to take their dead utilities like washing machines and ovens off their hands, which I would then take to the scrapyard and make a quick little bit of money. Now, a big source of my contacts ended up coming from social media, such as Instagram or Facebook Marketplace, and for the most part, everything went smoothly. But every now and then, I would get a shady seeming opportunity that I would have to think twice about. I'll never forget when I was messaged on Facebook to pick up a broken lawnmower and a torn down shed from a property about an hour away from my house. It was in September of 2017, and I typically didn't pick up scrap after dark because the yard was usually closed by then. But it seemed like this guy had a lot for me to pick up, and he claimed to only be able to meet after he got home from work around 6 p.m. So I figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen, right? The day came that I was supposed to meet him, and I messaged him to confirm that everything was still good to go. And once I got the okay, I hopped into my truck and began making my way to the man's house. There wasn't much traffic, so the drive only took about 45 minutes. But by the time I got to the small, one-lane road where the man lived, the sun had already set. The road was surrounded by thick woods on either side of it, and it almost looked like the guy's house was the only one on the entire road. After driving a bit down the one-lane road, I finally saw a beat-up looking mailbox that had the number 43 on it, which let me know that I had reached my destination. I slowly pulled into the driveway, and the first thing that I noticed was how overgrown the yard looked. From the looks of things, the lawnmower had been broken for some time. As I got closer to the house, I could tell from the dim light shining through the window that the owner was home. I parked my truck, and before I could take my phone out to send the man a message, I noticed someone coming out of the front door. It looked like the guy that I was there to meet, so I shut my truck off and stepped outside. As soon as my foot touched the pavement, I practically jumped out of my skin when I heard what sounded like a very large dog barking. The man came down the stairs and claimed that I didn't have anything to worry about and said the dog was inside. But I still couldn't help but flinch with every step I took, wondering if I was going to be attacked. I did my best to follow the man around as I began gathering all the scrap metal that he had for me. But about halfway through my trips, back and forth from the yard to my truck, I couldn't help but feel like I was hearing the sound of a child screaming underneath the sound of the loud barking. I tried to remain calm as I said my goodbye to the man, and as soon as I hit the road, I pulled my phone out and called my wife to tell her what just happened. She was concerned with what I had heard and said that I should call the police, and I was happy that I did. I informed the officer that I heard a child crying and what sounded like an aggressive animal inside a rundown home. And when they showed up, they ended up finding a small child who did not belong to the owner. It turned out to be a missing child from 2 states away who had been missing for more than 3 weeks at that time. There was also reportedly no dog on site, and the police believe the man was using the recording of a dog barking that was being played over speakers to try to drown out the child for crying for help. When the case went to court, it turned out that the only reason he needed the scrap removed in the first place was that his landlord was going to evict him if he didn't get it out of there. For the longest time, I was looking for a specific Funko Pop from a limited Marvel series that had come out. I've been collecting them ever since I was with my ex-boyfriend, who actually got me into comic books. And even though we had a pretty nasty breakup, I still wanted to complete my collection and continue to love everything Marvel and DC. Well, after about 3 years of looking for the final pop that I needed for my collection, I saw that someone named Aaron had listed it for sale on the Facebook Marketplace. After exchanging a couple messages, we both figured out a good time to meet, which ended up being around 8 p.m. the following night. The two of us agreed to meet at the mall because Aaron claimed to have some clothes shopping to do, and I actually needed to pick up my younger brother from his job at the pretzel stand, so it worked out. When the time came, I pulled into the mall parking lot at the entrance closest to the JCPenney, which was where we agreed to meet. And before I even made it to an empty parking spot, I recognized my ex's car. James loved his red Miata, and we took so many pictures of it that I could pick it out from a lineup. I decided that I didn't want to deal with him, so I ended up driving over to the movie theater parking lot and sending Aaron a message letting him know I was there. However, about 2 minutes after I sent the message, I noticed that Aaron had seen it, but not replied, and before I could send him another message to make sure that he actually saw it, I saw James in my rearview mirror walking toward my car. I'm glad the car was locked because as he walked up to my door, he tried to open it. When he realized he couldn't, he began yelling through the window asking me to just hear him out. I ignored him and pulled out my phone to message Aaron and my brother to let them know what was happening. But when he saw Aaron's name on my phone, James said something that surprised me. "He's not coming, you know," he said. I looked up at him, confused as to why he would say something like that. That was when he let me know that he was James and created the account and the marketplace post because I had been ignoring him. I immediately began to freak out and began texting my brother letting him know that I would meet him in a different parking lot. There was no way I was getting out of the car at that point. But the more I ignored James to text my brother, the angrier he got. And eventually he got so mad that he began smacking my window to get my attention. I turned my car on, and as I put my car in reverse, James smacking turned to him punching, and I screamed as he began trying to break my window and yelling at me to stop. He kept yelling, "I just want to talk to you." But I had never seen him so angry. I pulled out as fast as I could in fear of my life and began driving around the mall wondering where I would be safe to pick up my brother. I was afraid that James was following me. Eventually, my brother texted me back and told me that he was standing outside of the entrance near the side of the mall and that I could swing by and pick him up. I liked this plan because I didn't have to actually park. I grabbed my brother and we began driving home. The entire time I was paranoid that James was following me. Thankfully, there was no sign of him after returning to my house. My father ended up messaging his parents and letting them know that if he stepped foot near me again, we would be filing a restraining order. That was the last time I heard from him, but I'll never forget the look on his face as he tried to break my window to get to me. I had just purchased a new car after finally saving up enough money, and since my driveway had limited space, I decided to sell the Hyundai that I used to drive. I tried asking around to see if any of my friends or family members might need a car, but when no one was offering to buy it, I decided to list it on the Facebook Marketplace. It was a 2003 Sonata with 140,000 miles. And based on what I saw similar cars going for on the site, I listed it for $4,000 or best offer. I was a little surprised at how long it took before someone finally messaged me about the car, but after about 2 weeks, I finally felt like I had a solid offer. I had to drop the asking price to $3,400, but when the guy messaged me, offered to pay cash, I decided to take the money rather than wait for a better offer. The man's name, according to Facebook, was Lucas, and after discussing it, he asked me if I would be able to meet him at a garage that he supposedly owned. He claimed to not have a working vehicle at the moment and was hoping I would be able to drop the car off. And not thinking anything of it, I checked to see how far the garage was from my house and asked my friend if he would follow me in his car and drive me home after I made the sale. My buddy Jeremy said that it wouldn't be a problem, and when the time came, I drove over to Jeremy's house so that he could follow behind me till we got to the garage. The route to the garage was mostly highway for the first 15 or so minutes of the drive. And then we had to take the side roads for another 5 minutes before the GPS told me that I had reached my destination. I could see the garage, but in my rear view, there was no sign of Jeremy. I figured that I must have lost him at the light or something, but considering I put the address into his phone, I figured he would be there shortly. I planned on waiting in the car until he got there, but before I could message Lucas to let him know what was going on, I could see 3 men coming out from the side of the garage. I tried to see if any of them looked like Lucas's profile picture, but as far as I could tell, he wasn't there. I hoped that they just happened to be walking in the direction of my car and were just going to pass me. Sadly, that's not what happened. As the 3 men got closer to my car, I could tell that they were heading right for me. I smiled and nodded, thinking that maybe they just wanted to know who I was and why I was there. But before I could even begin rolling down my window, the man closest to me pulled a gun out of his waistband and pointed it in my direction. My hands instinctively left the steering wheel and went up in the air as I hoped and prayed for him not to pull the trigger. His 2 friends approached my door and opened it with ease as I didn't have the chance to lock it. And before I knew it, I was on the ground. I tried not to make any sudden moves as the men loaded into my car, and within a second, they were pulling away. It all happened in under a minute, and I was in absolute shock. On one hand, I was glad to be alive, but on the other, I was still really confused about what just happened to me. I got up off the ground and looked down the road to see if Jeremy had caught up yet, but there was no sign of his car. I walked over to the garage and looked inside, and that was when I realized that I had been conned from the beginning. Through a window, I could see that the garage had been abandoned for God knows how long, and before I even pulled out my phone to check, I knew that Lucas had used a fake profile. I opened up Facebook and tried to find his profile only to discover that his account had been deleted, even though it was active right before I pulled up to the garage. I called the police while I waited for Jeremy to arrive and reported the car stolen. Jeremy eventually showed up, and the 2 of us got out of there as fast as we could. Every now and then, I wonder what happened with that car, but as far as I know, the police never found it. All I know is I'll never use Facebook to sell something like that again.